We had a guest speaker. The Bullit Reps.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us for another episode in the 2025 eMTB Shootout. Today's bike is the Santa Cruz Bullit. So let's dive in, learn a little bit about this bike, and see how it performed out on the trails. All right, everyone, so before we dive into this 170 millimeter Bosch Performance CX equipped eMTB, we'd like to take a quick second and thanks to sponsors who helped make this series possible. Thanks to Fox Racing for kitting us out, making us look good and feel nice and safe and protected on the trail. We've updated all of the test bikes with the same test tire, which is a Schwalbe Albert Gravity out back in the radial construction with a Magic Mary Gravity up front. Also, we'd like to thank Velocirax for helping us transport these heavy e-bikes from destination to destination. And of course, the host, which is Zion Mountain Ranch. They've got two really awesome trail networks just down the road here at the edge of Zion National Park. Great food, great cabins. So check them out if you're looking for a spot to go ride in southern Utah. So let's get into the Bullit. So, Sean, what are the ranges and how many models are available?
So there's 4 models available, 70, 90, which come with the brand new SRAM mechanical transmission. And there's GX AXS and the current build that we have here, EXO AXS Reserve. Pricing starts at $7,400 and goes up to $11,900, at least as of today. Right. That could very well change. Our build here has Fox Factory 38, brand new Float X2, and obviously, as the name suggests, reserve carbon wheels. Now, the EXO AXS frame is the only frame that is the CC build, which also means that there are no cable ports. So you are stuck running a wireless transmission drivetrain. Okay. All other builds come with a C frame. Cable ports come with it.
Speaking of being stuck with things, this bike is designed to be exclusively run as a mullet or mixed wheel bike, correct?
Yep, that is correct.
Okay. Also designed to run a 600 watt hour battery, which is internal and not easily removable. So that was an intentional choice by Santa Cruz. And while that certainly is going to turn a lot of people off from the bike, it was a decision they made to get the bike to ride and feel the way they wanted to. And I would say they achieved that. The bike rides and feels like a Santa Cruz. So, there is a 250 watt hour power more range extender, which you can get, plugs in and gives you a nice 850 watt hour range. And we put in some pretty good miles. Sean, do you remember off the top of your head your ride on this bike?
Yeah, so our battery killing ride back home at Horse Ridge, I did 3 laps in turbo, 1 lap in tour, just to kind of eke out that last lap. And total mileage was around 21. And then it was about 4,600 feet of vert, returning with probably less than 5% battery.
Okay.
I mean, granted, I'm 160 pounds, so that kind of plays into the battery life.
Right.
Somebody that's 190, 200, you might not be able to do all that turboing.
Yeah. What was our mileage on the other ride that we did?
It was a 23-mile loop and just over 3,100, and we had, I believe, 2 bars plus a half left.
Yeah. And that was an eco ride, so.
Yeah, that was a mix between blue or
eMTB and a little bit of eco.
Yeah, and Rob was on it also.
Yeah, Rob's 220 pounds.
Yeah.
And that's post update, correct?
Correct. Yeah, it was post update. That being said, moving into the rest of kind of the impressions and setup of the bike, right? We'll hop into that. I think looking at it, this bike looks awesome. Part of that is the slimness in the lines of having the non-easily removable battery. I dig the suspension layout platform. I think it looks good. Their little rear mud flap guard. I do wish it was a little wider to the sides to protect some kind of gunk and grit from going into the linkage. But other than that, I would say the fit and finish of everything on the bike is typical Santa Cruz quality. And that by that, I mean it's pretty darn good and impressive looking. So you want to talk setup?
Yeah, so setup on this guy, pretty straightforward up front with a 38, just ran my normal pressure. This was one of the first bikes I rode with that new X2, and so that took a little getting used to in the changes in how that shock reacts, but using a 30% sag guideline, and then I started kind of in the middle on compression and ended up winding high speed out and firming up low speed just to give me a little bit more platform. And that provided me a lot of support when I was pumping. And I mainly rode this here locally at these trails at Applecross, where there's a lot of flatter sections where I wanted some more support pumping. And I also did ride it out at that other zone that was quite hectic, and it found a really nice balance, not even changing shock pressures or anything like that. I did run it in the low setting. Okay. I preferred the low setting. Yeah. I know Rob, and actually, no, Sean, you preferred the high setting.
Right? So did I.
Yeah, you too. Oh.
Yeah, both Rob and Cole liked the low setting, and then I believe us as well as Leonard liked it in the high setting, and we did play with the progression chips as well a little bit, and I think we liked high progression a bit better. But yeah, overall, I think the suspension for me was a little more time consuming to set up, because like some of the bikes in the test are very forgiving and they can kind of double duty flowy, pumpy, jumpy trails and then turn around and handle like high speed, high frequency, like breaking bump chatter or sharp square edge rock gardens. And I felt like this bike, I kind of was like, what are we gonna ride? And let me tune the shock for that day. Obviously, we rode this bike both pre-Bosch update, post-Bosch update. And for those who maybe are unaware, it now has 100 newton meters of torque, 750 watts of peak power, and that is something that you have to elect into once it is available to consumers in the app. We were lucky enough to have a couple of people from Bosch come out and update our bikes for the shootout so that we could kind of do a comparative test. Let's talk a little bit about climbing, both bike and drive unit.
Yeah. So pre-Bosch update, I spent a couple days climbing at Horse Ridge, and it ended up being one of my least favorite bikes to climb. I just felt like the rear end would constantly get hung up on all the square edge rocks, and I would just like keep lurching forward, and it wasn't a very comfortable bike to climb. Now, post update and changing to the high position, climbing here, entirely different experience. Like, I enjoyed climbing it. I thought it was great, comfortable. It managed to go around tight switchbacks pretty well. And the extra power, I mean, it was nice, but I mean, pre-update was totally fine too. That 85, I think, was a solid number.
What did you think about the climbing?
I felt a similar sentiment. It was a little firm off the top compared to some other bikes. Okay. Opening up that low speed did help on some of like the just normal trailside chatter. And as far as maneuverability, I mean, it's a generally middle of the ground wheelbase. You get the short wheel out back. The upright seat angle, I think it's 78.2 effective.
I think it's 78.7. Well, it depends on what chip position.
So it has a very upright climbing position, which made wheelie turns out of corners super easy. Again, the power modulation on the update does take a little getting used to, especially coming from the old settings on that system. But overall, it was kind of in the middle of the ground for me. Like, it didn't wow me in any areas, and it also didn't leave me pissed off in any areas at the same time.
Yeah, I thought it was a solid climber all around. There was no real standout negatives, no real standout positives. Like, it was just a good climber. It did what I asked of it. You know, I preferred it in the high position, like I said. I found myself clipping cranks and pedals a little bit more often in the rocky techie stuff, but I didn't find that it was overly uncomfortable. And especially compared to like their VPP bikes, I thought this thing was a little bit more comfortable to ride and climb overall. But yeah, let's move on to where the bike really comes alive and shines, and that would be cornering, handling, jumping, descending. Where does the bike stand out for you there?
In the high position, this was probably one of my favorite bikes to go down the Maestro DH trail. Just super comfortable, compliant. It received rider input very well, made it so like playing and popping and just like picking up on jumps that you might not have had enough speed for with other bikes, made it super easy. And it was just a holler to play with. And
Cole, standout for you?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of go back to the firmer feeling I was getting, which was both good and bad. Here at Applecross, some of that flatter terrain, rolly and pumpy, I had less speed at a certain corners, or took less speed into certain corners where there was gaps, and I was able to pop and get those gaps compared to some of the other bikes. On some of the higher speed terrain, I felt like it maybe got a little overwhelmed at times for my riding position, being off the back and kind of some chatter. And it's hard to say if that's a tune issue. You know, I did play around with compression and air a lot, and I'd never found my sweet spot. But what I would say inverse to that is when I was in the bike, my heels were down. I felt like I had a lot of traction, and it was really rewarding when I worked my body position, when I was coming into something, getting up over the front, getting off the back, and just kind of trusting that grip. And I think that Santa Cruz does a really good job with their geometry, and you just feeling like you're in and ready to go.
So for me, I don't know what it is about Santa Cruz bikes, but they just feel so good beneath me when it comes to cornering, leaning, maneuvering the bike. I just love the position that they put me in when I'm standing over the bike. It's just really, really good for me. So I just think that they really have done a good job of making the geo and handling characteristics of all their bikes across the board just really good for their intended application and genre of riding style. I did find myself really, really enjoying the bike in certain areas and terrains, and then other areas was struggling a little bit more with the activity or the sensitivity that I wanted. Start getting into 8, 10, 12, 15 minute long descents that are just like embedded rock and you're hammering them. I started to just notice a little bit more hand and foot fatigue on this bike. Same with like the really high frequency braking bumps, like not so much like the bomb holes, but just the little ripples. Going over those, it was just like really kind of, it transmitted a lot of feedback through the bike up into me. And I played around with the settings a lot. So all that to say, the bike really does well in certain areas, and then other areas it could just require a little bit more time to work on your tune and get that shock right. Stuffing it into berms, railing corners, popping and jumping, like manualing, searching for gaps on obstacles that you could double. And if the rock gardens were short, right, like 10, 20 seconds up to, a minute or so long, like you could hammer through that, and then you picking your speed back up and you're having a great time. But yeah, I just think that based on your terrain, maybe your weight, and how much you want to spend time tuning the suspension, I do really, really like this new shock. It could just be something worth considering, whether you prefer soft, supple comfort and traction versus a little bit more of a lively and stiffer platformed bike that is going to reward in corners and jump riding versus like plowing through the rough. Ideal consumer then. Would you recommend the bike?
Yeah, I would recommend it to someone that maybe doesn't have, as we said, some of the more high frequency terrain. The big hit stuff, totally fine. But if you're looking for a bike to generate speed and pump and just really use the terrain to your advantage, I think it's a really good fit. And especially if you like corners, this thing cornered really well.
Yeah, absolutely. Sean?
I would agree. And I mean, speaking on the speed aspect that you just mentioned, these EXO or the reserve carbon wheels with that DT's hub, so worth the upgrade.
All right, well, folks, there you have it. The Santa Cruz Bullit. Overall, I would say a really solid machine that has impressed our riders for the most part and has been a lot of fun to ride, and one that we certainly think a lot of people would enjoy out there on the trail. So thanks again to Fox Racing, Schwalbe Tires, Velocirax, and Zion Mountain Ranch for hosting us for this big shootout series. Stay tuned as we work our way to the grand finale to see where the Bullit stacks up with the rest of the crew and our votes in the grand finale. Thanks for watching. We'll see you out on the trails.